Hello, good morning. Welcome to this week's Learn with Lorna, somehow episode 150, which is quite extraordinary. My name is Lorna Steele-McGinn. I'm the Community Engagement Officer with the Highland Archive Service, which has 4 archive centres in Wick, in Inverness, in Portree and in Fort William, where we look after the historic documents of the Highlands of Scotland. This series is brought to you by High Life Highland, which is our umbrella organisation. And High Life Highland is a charity registered in Scotland, and there's no payment or subscription required to take part in this series of talks, but if you're able to donate to our work, then we're very, very grateful for that, and there's a link to be able to do so in the text of this film. So welcome to the second last one of this run of Learn with Lorna episodes, another one dealing with business and industry, and this time the heavy industry, perhaps more associated with the south of Scotland, the north of England and Wales, certainly more than the north of Scotland. We're looking at mines, quarries and collieries. I went into this episode's research knowing we had a certain amount of material which might be of use, so for instance records relating to the Raasay iron ore mines and relating to the Brora colliery, but I wasn't prepared for the sheer amount of information we hold on this subject, that just how many quarries and mines used to pepper our countryside. That must just be my naivety that I was absolutely unaware of that. We have collections and items in all 4 of our offices, and covering a wide range of dates and a wide range of types of extractive industry. So for instance, slate mines, marble quarries, limestone, gold, iron, a huge range of things. And it really made me think, well, of course we needed to quarry stones across the Highlands and Islands. It's the simplest, quickest way to get building material locally. So all our houses, churches, walls, boundaries, harbour walls, gravestones, pavements, all of those things have come from local quarries. So when I started to look into it, then I looked at the statistical accounts, where I found multiple references to coals, to mines and to quarries. So let's have a start. Let's start by looking at quarries and a couple of extracts from the statistical accounts to illustrate what I mean. Now, if you've watched this series for a while, you'll know the statistical accounts were first produced in the late 1700s, a second series in the mid-1800s, summarising each parish, each area, the geography, the industry, the people, and so on. So this is from the first statistical account. If you've watched for a long time, you'll also know I can never say that word without stumbling over it. So this is from the first one for Dingwall in 1792. Quarries. 3 quarries have opened in this parish. The stones in one of them, which is not now used, were of very indifferent quality, being apt to moulder into sand when long exposed to the weather. Another, the property of the public and discovered within these 15 years, is a much better quality. Its stones, though hard, are extremely useful in all parts of houses where hewn work is not necessary, and lying within a quarter mile of the town, they have contributed not a little to its improvement. The third quarry, which is of a light blue, a lime of a light blue colour, is private property. It is full of superior quality, as it is fit for hewn as well as coarse work, and is capable of a very fine polish. It has, however, one disadvantage. There is a small intermixture of iron ore, upon which the rain in time operates and stains in a very ugly manner the contiguous stones. So it's strong, but if it gets marked if it's rained on for too long, so that's not ideal. The statistical account for Cromdale says this country abounds with limestone quarries. The parish of Ray says this: there is an abundance of limestone, moorstone and granite. 4 quarries of freestone have been opened, one in the hill above Big House, another in the hill above Sandside, one upon each side of Sandside Bay. Blocks of stone for millstones are found in different parts of the hills. Marl has been found in Brabant and Dunray. A slender vein of lead ore was discovered lately near Ray, but in circumstances that afford no encouragement to work it. Iron ore is found in different places throughout this parish. And Thurzos says, in every part of this parish there are quarries of whinstone, and in some places of grey slate, which are frequently used in covering the roofs of the houses. In the shores of Scrabster and Pennyland there is, as formerly observed, a good freestone quarry, easily accessible and wrought at low water. So really interesting just to go, when I looked at it, I thought they're everywhere. You really get an idea of how much of a local industry it is, and towns and villages and parishes having access to local building material, which of course makes complete sense when you look at the different colours of houses, the variety of colours within the buildings that we have. So we can see references to quarries within the statistical accounts, and yes, Liz, I agree with you, I love them. They are so full of information and stories and opinions. So what do we then have within our own original material collections? So that was where I went next. There are some references in letters. So for instance, we have a letter from 1791 in which Donald MacDonnell reports to Campbell Mackintosh his proceeds from a quarry, so how much income he's making from it. That letter's in the Baillie of Dunayne collection, as is an 1844 letter written by a Miss J. Gordon in Aberdeen to Miss Baillie, in which Miss J. Gordon notes that her brother is opening a quarry in anticipation of improvements being made at Aberdeen Harbour. So we can see that the kind of cyclical nature of it, that the harbour needs to be built. He's out there looking for a quarry to be able to open to facilitate that business. Also, what we find there is the name of someone involved. Now, for the most part, there's not a lot of information about the people working in the quarries, particularly the further back you go, or about the practical workings of the quarries. But occasionally we do find some things, and I'll go into those. For instance, if we have a look at the Borough of Tain records, we can find out about the state of the quarry in Tain in 1865. So there's a letter here. Tain, 25th of November 1865. Having been appointed by the Town Council of Tain to examine and report on the present state of the town's quarry, let to Mr. Hendry of Inverness, we visited the quarry this day, and have to report that the debris left in the mouth or the front of the rock cutting would require to be removed before the quarry can be properly worked. We estimate the probable expense of removing this debris at £25 sterling. Also that the exposed face of the rock is not near the height that it was when Mr. Hendry got possession, and in its present state we do not think it possible that pavement or any particular stone could be easily got until the quarry is cleared. We found only one man working. If we have a look in our Mackintosh of Raigmore collection, we find another letter about a quarry in need of clearing. This is a letter written in 1834 by Angus Mackintosh and James Mackenzie, in which they offer to level and clear the Lays quarry for Mackintosh of Raigmore. The letter details the work they would need to undertake to get it cleared to be usable again. Now, all of those documents I've mentioned so far, along with plans of quarries and photographs and other material, are all held at the Highland Archive Centre in Inverness, but we have material across all of our centres. So for instance, in Lochaber Archive Centre, we have documents relating to the Ballachulish Slate Quarry. And I wanted to share with you some research done by our team in Lochaber a few years ago about a fascinating part of the Ballachulish Slate Quarry's history. So let me share this with you. Slate seems to have been first quarried at Ballachulish in the early 1690s, and Ballachulish slate was regarded as superior variety, much prized for roofing. By 1900, the quarries were owned by the Ballachulish Slate Quarry Company Limited, employing some 500 men. The managing director and chairman of the board of the company was Colonel Edward Malcolm, who played an important part in the story of the Ballachulish lockout. The potential for conflict existed before the events of 1902. Although the quarrymen were not unionised, they did try to obtain proper contracts and better conditions, efforts which do not seem to have been met by the company's board with a ready hearing. Amongst the quarrymen's grievances were the company's insistence that it be the only supplier of explosives and tools, for which heavy prices were charged. In addition, the men were to be paid 8 weeks in arrears. Trying to provide for their health care, the quarrymen had formed a medical committee and had Dr. Lachlan Grant as their doctor. He was paid through deductions from their wages at a salary of around £270 per year. the paying of which was wholly the responsibility of the men. In July 1902, Dr. Grant was summarily dismissed by the company and forbidden contact with the workmen. Colonel Malcolm appears to have given no real explanation for this, simply saying that his board was justified in removing Dr. Grant. In response, the workmen leapt to Dr. Grant's defence, held a meeting to demand an explanation, and when it was not given, decided to resist. The company then insisted that any man coming to work had to sign an agreement rejecting any claim to better wages or conditions and approving the removal of Dr. Grant. None of the workers did this, and no one went to work. The company took action against Dr. Grant in the Court of Session, seeking an interdict against him, as he was continuing to minister to the medical needs of the men, defying the company's orders. The men argued in return that it was they and not the firm that actually employed the doctor. The dispute bogged down, and the quarry remained unworked. Men were forced through poverty to leave their families to go and work far away, many in the shipyards of Glasgow. Some even went overseas. However, the company was also hit, experiencing severe loss of profit as they were doing no business, and at this time there was a high demand in the building trade for their slate. The workers received some assistance from Keir Hardie MP, founder of the Independent Labour Party, who visited Ballachulish and raised the issue of the quarrymen's plight in Parliament. After more than a year, the company backed down and the men came back to work. Their conditions were improved and Dr. Grant was reinstated. He stayed at Ballachulish for 40 more years, dying in 1945. The slate quarries were finally closed in the 1960s due to the increasing availability of cheaper roofing materials. A long extract, but I thought it was such an interesting story that I would share it all with you. Quite interesting how some of these things unfold. Imagine that a year long. So I mentioned there that there are many more quarries than I would have expected, but I think the one I certainly did expect, that's perhaps one of the most famous things to be quarried in the Highlands and Islands, is Caithness flagstone. Flagstone apparently coming from the Old Norse flaga for stone. The Hallkirk statistical account of 1845 references those flagstone quarries and the stones being exported in great numbers. And this is an extract from the Olrig statistical account of 1845, which gives a bit more detail about the industry. In the raising of stone for pavement, much has been done for some years back. The finest quality of this is found on the property of Mr. Trail of Ratter, the stratification being so very regular and plain that it answers admirably for streets without any surface dressing. So it's such a good level, clear quality that it doesn't need much work done to it. The layers are from 3/4 of an inch to 5 inches thick and upwards in the quarry. The colour of the stone from smoke grey to blue. This stone is very hard and exceedingly strong and durable. Some of the oldest houses in Caithness are roofed with it, and it has been employed with advantage for granary floors, being laid on joists at the ordinary distance in the upper as well as the lower flats of buildings. The inhabitants of London, Newcastle, Edinburgh, Glasgow and other towns are now reaping the benefit of pavement exported from this parish. At Castle Hill, machinery is employed in sawing the edges and polishing the surface of the stone, which is now used in the prepared form for lobby floors, tables, hearthstones, mantelpieces and other purposes. Upwards of 100 labourers are constantly employed, and numerous cargoes of this useful commodity are exported every season. The proprietor, having erected a neat and commodious harbour for his own use, now has the pleasure and the advantage of seeing his own and other vessels coming in and going out in safety of the immediate neighbourhood of his mansion house. The tonnage required being from 3,000 to 4,000, and the annual shipment of pavement alone being from 300,000 to 400,000 square feet. So you really get an idea there of the huge industry this was in this one parish of Ulrig and Caithness. 100 people working there, and a purpose-built harbour being built, and what did I say there? 300,000 to 400,000 square feet of stones being exported every year. And Caithness flagstone is still in evidence right across Caithness and much further afield. I'm sure someone will message to say something about Caithness flagstone. It's in walls, in fireplaces, in lintels, in gateposts right across Caithness. We have the floor at the Highland Archive Centre in Inverness is deliberately made of Caithness flagstone, the walls of Murray sandstone, so that it's local. Around Cutty Sark, for those of you who know London, the dry dock area is paved in Caithness flagstone. Stephen Hawking's memorial in Westminster Abbey is made of Caithness flagstone, as is part of the New York Memorial to the 67 British people who died in the bombings of 9/11. So you can see the importance that it still has for us. At Nucleus, we hold some really fascinating material relating to Caithness flagstone and this industry, including P318, which is a booklet called Railways of Caithness by Wilfred Sims, and MUN 542, which gives a history of Spittal flagstones, written by Archie Sinclair. Here's an extract from Wilfred Sims' work. The pavement or flagstone industry of Caithness. Small-scale working of Caithness flags, a flag being a large, thin slab of stone, has taken place for many centuries. This natural ability to split into thin sections is due to the rock's sedimentary origin. Used locally for a wide range of purposes, numerous examples can be seen around Caithness. The first recorded export of flags for paving is credited to a Mr. Scott of Merkel, a small village east of Castle Hill, but it was not until the intervention of James Trail of Ratter, Sheriff Depute of the County of Caithness, that any large-scale production commenced. Taking over the existing quarries at Castle Hill in 1824, he immediately set about reorganising their methods of production, and a year later made the first large-scale export shipment. Caithness paving was soon in great demand owing to its tough and resilient nature, and it was used overseas in places as far apart as South America, Canada and Australia. Other quarries opened in quick succession wherever suitable material could be located, and soon Thurso became the centre of a fairly short-lived but extremely prosperous trade. And that article goes on to say that in 1874 the Caithness Flagstone Quarrying Company was set up to consolidate the operation of the quarries in and around Thurso, and their 1890s brochure listed quarries in 15 sites around Thurso, with another 8 sites for working and polishing the stone. So it's just a huge industry. The other document I mentioned, which comes from our Hetty Munro collection, and you'll maybe have seen the Lorna on Hetty Munro, deals with the history of one of those sites in particular, Spittal. And it gives fascinating detail about the actual work undertaken in the quarries over the years, from cutting the stone by hand saw through the coming of steam power and the frame saws, the work of the dressers, the splitters, the hammermen and the scuffers. The scuffer, I think the others are fairly self-explanatory titles, but the scuffers were the ones who made sure that the stones were level, so they would stand them on it and make sure every side was level, so that it didn't get to the point that you laid them as a floor and then had to try and chip them level. That was what the scuffers did. It also talks about the introduction of diamond blades for cutting the stones and all those innovations that came over the years. At one point, Spittal employed over 100 men, and A&D Sutherland, who have owned the Spittal Quarry since Spittal Mains Quarry since 1966, continue to operate Spittal's last quarry there, last active flagstone quarry, and it was they who supplied some of those items I spoke about in London and further afield. So a lot of quarries, far more quarries than I expected. And if we move from quarries to mines, again, I was surprised at how much we had and the range of mines that have existed in the Highlands and Islands. According to the statistical accounts, there was a silver ore mine in Kingussie Parish, iron mines in Assynt. We have documents about Scotland's first gold mine, the lead mines in Watton and Spittal. But I'm going to have a quick look at Loch Allen's silica sand mine and Rassay's iron ore mines. We hold the documents in our Loch Aber Archive Centre about the silica mines in Loch Allen, D35, which is includes staff records, correspondence, photographs, plans and a range of other material. But I thought, rather than kind of delving into that, given that I'm covering such a lot of things in one episode, I thought the quickest way to tell you the history of Lochalan Silica Sand Mine would be to share an extract from the website of Lochalan Quartz Sand Limited. Lochalan was first mentioned as a potential source of silica sand in 1895, when a vast deposit of white Cretaceous sandstone running inland from Lochalan shore was reported. In 1923, the Edinburgh Geological Survey analysed a sandstone sample. It proved to be one of the purest deposits in the world. At that time, imported silica sand was quite cheap, and the extraction of Lochalan sand was considered to be uneconomic. It wasn't until World War II, when other sources of silica sand were cut off and pure silica was needed for the production of high-quality glass for periscope lenses and gun sights, that the Lochalan mine was opened. In the beginning, the sand was not processed on site, and the unprocessed sand was shipped out by puffer boat. Soon after, a loading and processing facility was built in Lochalan, first at the West Pier and then in the 1970s at its current location. Initially, they tried to use horses to haul out the sand underground, but it proved unsuccessful, and soon they started using diesel locomotives. Nowadays, the sand gets transported to the plant by articulated dump trucks. In 2008, the owners of the mine decided to close the mine, but in June 2011, a joint venture between the Italian mining company Minerali Industriali and the global glass manufacturer NSG was created, and Lochalan Quartz Sand Limited was registered. In September 2012, Lochalan Sand Mine was officially reopened. We also hold some documents from the 1960s that refer to behaviour on the site, but I'm entirely sure that behaviour no longer happens, so I'm not going to share them. So we have that silica sand in Lochalan. I've spoken previously about the diatomite mines in Skye, but what about the iron ore mines on Raasay? We hold documents about this both in Skye and Lochalan archives and in the Highland Archive Centre. And here are some extracts from an article from our wonderful Inverness Field Club collection at the Highland Archive Centre in Inverness, written by Lawrence Draper in 1986. One of your first thoughts on arriving on Raasay might have been, why on earth does this small island need such a large pier? You might then have seen derelict buildings, and if it occurred to you that the pier and the buildings might have been connected, you would be correct. But how did such a beautiful Hebridean island come to be the hive of a now derelict industry? Just before the First World War, the Scottish coal and iron ore mining and iron smelting firm of William Baird and Company realised that there were millions of tons of iron ore in a layer about 2.5 metres thick in the upper layer strata on the island, and they opened a mine. In association with it, Baird's built several kilometres of narrow gauge railway, a crusher, 5 calcining kits, a huge iron ore hopper, and a reinforced concrete pier. Many aspects of the installation, such as the pier, diesel electric power generation, and the provision of powerful external electric lighting, were very advanced for their time. Because most of the local men had been called to the colours, Baird's arranged for German prisoners of war to work the installation from 1916 onwards. In permitting this, the British government appears to have contravened the Hague Convention, which specifically banned prisoners of war to be employed on munitions projects. To enable prisoners to be used, the project was effectively nationalised, although the word was not used, with Baird's operating it as agents for the government. Prisoners and local people worked in harmony together as colleagues, but relationships between Baird's and the Ministry of Munitions were at times hostile. At the end of 1917, the local men, who were badly paid in comparison to men doing similar work elsewhere, went on strike, and there were allegations in Parliament that German prisoners of war were being used as strikebreakers, with the result that Winston Churchill made statements in response. These allegations were at best only half-truths. Production rose from mid-1916 to the end of the war, a probable total of almost 200,000 tonnes of raw iron ore being produced. The iron content was much lower than expected, making the enterprise uneconomic except in times of national emergency. 2 German miners died during the war. Their colleagues built a 4-wheeled cradle on which they hauled a huge boulder from the beach near the pier to the cemetery about 3 kilometres away on the hill, at an altitude of about 70 metres. The boulder was beautifully carved into a gravestone by a miner, Corporal Duda, whose trade was that of stonemason. It now stands by the corner of the island's cemetery. 12 other miners were to die in February 1919 in the nationwide influenza epidemic, just weeks before they were due to be repatriated. After the end of the First World War, production was dramatically reduced and stopped within 6 months. Although Baird's maintained everything in full working order, almost the only further iron to be yielded in the Second World War came as scrap from the dismantled installation itself. So, quarries, mines. Finally, in the last 5 minutes, I wanted to finish with a word on collieries, and specifically on Brora Colliery, once the northernmost coal mine in the UK and the only British producer of Jurassic coal, and I'll come on to that shortly. At the Highland Archive Centre, we hold a collection of documents relating to Brora Colliery, including the memoranda and articles of association, accounts, sales registers, staffing records, plans, photographs, and a range of other material. Coal was mined in the area of Brora in Sutherland from at least the 16th century, but structured plans for a colliery didn't come about until 1810. There was a market for this coal. If it could be produced locally, it would stop the need to spend huge amounts of money on importing coal to the north of Scotland. But the plans, when they started to put them into effect, ran into thousands of pounds, and in 1825 the mine was closed when the Marquess of Sutherland withdrew funding. In 1872 it was revived as the Duke of Sutherland stepped in to manage it. Over the following decades the colliery passed through different hands, but it continued to meet local needs. It powered the machines at the local wool mill, it powered the street lighting. I mentioned that Brora produced Jurassic coal, and that was one of the ways that it was different to the coal that came out of the rest of Britain. Most of the coal mined across the UK was Carboniferous, so it was around 300 million years old. The coal that was mined in Brora was Jurassic, as I say. It was only about 170 million years old. And that was what made the difference, but also really what dictated to some extent the mine's future. This coal was volatile. It was high in ash and sulphur content, and it had a high content of pyrite, fool's gold, which can combust when it's very close to high sulphur coal, which of course it was. And so sales dropped of coal from the Brora Colliery. But as we moved on, methods were developed and found to reduce the risk of that spontaneous combustion, and sales rose again. And that kind of up and down trend of the business is really the constant story of the Brora Colliery. As more and more businesses started to use electricity rather than directly using coal, trade downturned. And in 1949, when the lease was up, it was nearly closed. But the MP David Robertson stepped in and the mine continued. And having gone from that low point in 1949, they ended up with very high production figures through the 1950s, winning a UK mining competition for output. But it wasn't to last. Despite new funding in 1966 to sink new boreholes, the mine was finally closed in 1974. And like so many heavy industries, and mining in particular, it had played a central role in the industry and in the community and in the everyday life of the town. So there you go. I can't believe I've finished on time. A whistle-stop tour through some of the surprisingly many mines, quarries and collieries in the Highlands. I hope you've enjoyed that episode. Stuart, you're forgiven for being on holiday. You're absolutely entitled. Next week will be the final in this run of episodes before we take the summer break, and I'll be looking at stories from Thurso. So thanks in advance to my colleagues at Nucleus who have already done a power of work for me for that episode. That final episode will be pre-recorded because I'm at a training course, and because it's a nationwide training course, I can't really ask them to work around Lorna, I'm afraid. So it will be pre-recorded next week. So I'll say my thanks just now for all of your company so far this year, for joining me, for your lovely comments, for sharing stories and memories. It's just been a joy again. So thank you very, very much. Next week's episode, as I say, will be on stories from Thurso, and then we'll break for the summer and rejoin on Thursday the 7th of September. So I hope you can join me back here on that date. I'll advertise it on Facebook shortly, and that way you can like it, and then you'll get a reminder to come along. Don't forget about me over the summer. A reminder that this series is brought to you by High Life Highland at no cost to the viewer. High Life Highland is a charity registered in Scotland, and there's no payment or subscription required to take part in this series of events. But if you're able to donate towards our work, then we're very grateful for that. Thank you for all your messages saying enjoy my break and enjoy my holidays. I will, fortunately or unfortunately, be working flat out on other things, but absolutely it will be good to see you back in September. So thank you very much.